Right, guys, mammals, chapter 9. So we're gonna start with a little bit about the evolution of mammals, since we haven't addressed that yet, and then get into morphology and systems. So what distinguishes mammals? They are the only vertebrate group with hair and mammary glands. They are thought to be the descendants of synapse of synapsy reptiles. The few other distinguishing characteristics in mammals include a lower jaw, composed solely of the dentary bone, and we'll look at that a little bit more closely here in a second. Two sets of teeth, those that are both deciduous, as in milk teeth, and permanent teeth. Three middle ear bones, pinna that funnels sound waves into the ear, so our earlobes. The loss of the right fourth aortic arch in the heart, as well as non-nucleated red blood cells. And then also a muscular diaphragm that separates the thoracic and the abdominal cavity. So some of the unique characteristics we see in mammals. There are about 5,700 species of mammals known to inhabit the world. As I said, mammals arose from a synapsid reptilian ancestor, and the subclass Synapsidae appears in the lower Pennsylvanian more than 300 million years ago, and became extinct after the end of the Triassic, about 190 million years ago. So the cladogram of the Synapsida emphasizes some of the mammalian characteristics you can see in this figure on the right. So take a look at the synapsids that emphasize the origins of some of these important mammalian characteristics and traits we just talked about on that cladogram. The other figure shows the evolution of major groups of mammals. One of the cynodonts groups gave rise to therians, which we refer to as the true mammals during the Triassic period. Current fossil evidence shows that all three groups of living mammals, monotremes, as in egg-laying mammals, marsupials with pouches, and placental mammals are derived from that same lineage. And I think it's worth noting here that those three strategies for reproduction, egg-laying, marsupial, and placental, are the most important characteristic for our divisions in mammals. So the phylogeny of the jaw articulation and ear bones is really important in the evolution of mammals. You can study this figure looking at early reptiles and the 3 to 4 bones that comprised the lower jaw compared to the mammalian lower jaw, and see the sort of fascinating event that occurred, which is that those lower jaw bones actually migrated to form some of the inner ear bones. And so you can see in this more detailed picture of the ear, the fate of those bones, the small residual bones of the inner ear. So there's some controversy, as in all the groups of vertebrates, as to whether mammals are monophyletic in origin. Some scientists point out that mammals share such a range of derived characteristics that were advanced within the cynodonts, that relationship is really beyond question. Prior to 2014, the earliest known mammal fossil was from the late Jurassic period. But in 2014, 3 small squirrel-like species were added to the mammalian family tree, and they support the idea that mammals actually originated at least 208 million years ago. And that rendering on the right is of this small squirrel-like species that was discovered. So living mammals are classified into 26 orders. Trema contains the only egg-laying mammals still living today, which includes the duck-billed platypus and 2 species of echidnas. All other mammals give birth to live young. Jurassic and early Cretaceous times were what the book referred to as times of experimentation in mammals. Lots of mammals evolved during this period. Dinosaurs were still abundant at that time. Primitive hoofed animals showed up, early primates, and even a beaver-like animal appeared. And this just shows that the ecological role of mammals was far greater than previously thought during this early period. The rendering on the left, a swimming beaver rendering, is the first primitive mammal and the oldest known to be preserved with fur, showing the presence of fur in those guys. So both embryologists and paleontologists continue to study the sort of fascinating relationship among mammals using DNA evidence and embryological studies. And DNA evidence shows some really cool stuff, including that elephants share a common ancestor with sea cows. And this continues to be picked apart by those 2 types of scientists. Mammalian skin. So the presence of a lightweight, waterproof epidermal was super important for mammals, allowing them to colonize a variety of environments. So the presence of hair was essential. Some mammals, like rats, have epidermal scales as part of their body, but only the armadillo actually has dermal scales that are beneath epidermal layer. So mammalian epidermis is really differentiated into a few distinct layers. The deepest layer, the stratum basal, is the area of active mitosis where new cells are created. As new cells form, older cells are pushed towards the surface and become part of the other strata, which terminates in the stratum corneum, a protective outer layer of largely dead cells. The epidermis also gives rise to many other features of mammals, including hair and nails, scales, hooves, the baleen that we see in whales, as well as horns. So a little more on some of these skin modifications and features. So the anatomical, developmental, and neurological data all support the hypothesis that mammalian hair actually arose from highly specialized sensory mechanoreceptors that were found in early synapsids. So rather than being a modification of scales, as with feathers, hair is actually the evolution of a modification to mechanoreceptors. Actually, let me give you a little more on hair here. So the outer, coarser, and usually longer hairs primarily serve as protection or guard hairs. Inner, finer, usually shorter hairs in a lot of mammals constitute what we would call the underfur, which insulates the body. There are several different specializations of hair, such as hairs around the mouth and eyes that serve as tactile organs. Some are sensitive to the touch. Hair is present in at least some stage of development for all mammals. There's one example of a species of whale where hair is only present in younger animals and then lost in the adult stage. So the typical hair consists of a shaft and a root. The shaft lies free within the follicle and projects above the surface of the skin. The root is the deeper portion within the follicle where hair hasn't really separated from the surrounding epidermal cell yet. The swelling at the base of the hair is known as the bulb, and that's the area of active mitosis that's constantly contributing new cells to make the hair longer. The shaft of a typical hair consists of 3 layers: an inner medulla, which actually contains the pigment for the color of the hair, the surrounding cortex that forms the main bulk of the hair, but transparent, and then an outer cuticle on the hair. There's a small, smooth muscle that inserts into the wall of the hair follicle of many mammals. And when that muscle contracts, the hair shafts are drawn toward a vertical position and causes what we would refer to as goosebumps. So like feathers, hair is constantly replaced. Some mammals replace their hair seasonally, as we see with snowshoe hair, which is important for camouflage in those species. There are lots of other modifications to the skin. So I've got a few of these outlined here. And I'm going to actually let you guys, for sake of brevity, kind of read through these on your own, but they include claws, nails, hooves, baleen that we see in whales for frayed edges and sheets that help strain plankton. We have true horns in some in the bovine family, and then some modifications of horns that we see with rhino horns, antlers, giraffe's horns. Most mammals, we do see sweat glands, which are an important feature within the skin, allowing for pheromones and scent, as well as thermoregulation. We see the mammary gland, which is just a modification of a sweat gland. And we also see oil glands and specialized scent glands, obviously perfected in skunks. Spend a little more time with some of these modifications. It's a lot. Here are representations of some of the different types of horns and antlers that we see. And moving on to the skeleton. So really, because of loss and fusion that we've already mentioned, there are a number of bones in the skull and the lower jaw of mammals that have rearranged so that we only have that single lower jawbone that we already mentioned. The axle of the skeleton in mammals has become stronger and more rigid. Most of the skeleton is completely ossified, and growth terminates at the adult stage, and the skeleton does not continue to grow once an organism has reached that adult stage. Mammals also possess a secondary palate, allowing them to continue breathing while they're chewing food. The vertebral column is made up of cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and caudal vertebrae. An articulating process allows adjacent vertebrae to overlap, giving additional firmness to the backbone. And ribs in mammals, we see 12 to 15 pairs of ribs. We do not see the unsnip processes that we see in some of the reptiles and birds. Secondary appendages in mammals are really highly modified based on their environment. So the pectoral girdle in most mammals, other than monotremes, consists either of a pair of clavicles and a scapula, or just a pair of scapula. So when present, the clavicle is there to brace the scapula against the sternum. The anterior appendages contain the 6 skeletal elements that we see in all vertebrates: the humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. And there are certainly modifications to those based on various habitats, which this figure shows. So an example is the humerus of moles and other digging animals is often short and stout. It's expanded areas that allow for attachment of large muscles used for digging, while the front limb of bats has been modified into a wing, allowing for flight. Front limbs of seals and sea lions and other marine mammals are really superficially resemble those of sea turtles and penguins. And front limbs of lots of mammals have been modified for grasping, with the thumb developing into an opposable structure capable of touching each of the other digits. The evolution of the opposable thumb was accomplished with the development of what we call a saddle joint at the base of the thumb. Fusion around the hip bones can unite several bones to form the pelvis. And then hind limbs of mammals are also comparable to those of reptiles and consist of the femur, tibia, fibula, tarsus, metatarsals, and phalanges. And then we've added a patella at the knee joint for protection. Lots of primates have a big toe or hallux, and in some cases, that hallux is opposable. Muscular system, we see expaxal muscles that exist in bundles along the vertebral column. They allow for side-to-side movement of the vertebral column and also provide support and arcing of the back. Appendicular muscles of mammals are similar to reptiles. We see muscles that help operate the jaw, quite well developed in mammals as well. And then skin muscles are also well developed in mammals and are used to elevate hairs, which allow for insulation and also as a response to danger. So circulatory system in mammals, the heart is comprised of 2 atria and 2 ventricles, 4-chambered heart. It's separated by an internal septa. The sinus venosus is incorporated into the wall of the right atrium. Normal heart rate can range from 25 beats per minute to more than 1,000. All blood being pumped from the left ventricle goes through the former left aortic arch prior to going to the head, into the front limbs, or to the descending aorta. So this route is actually the opposite from the condition that we see in birds, where we have the right aortic arch in birds rather than the left. It's sort of fascinating. So just a different circulation strategy. In mammals that spend a long time underwater, we see some modifications in the circulatory system that allows them to create reservoirs of oxygenated blood. And there's a little discussion in your book about that strategy in whales. The blood of mammals contains red blood cells, white blood cells, thrombocytes. With only one exception, mature circulating red blood cells in mammals are non-nucleated. And then we also see some heat absorbing and heat transporting capabilities in the blood of mammals involving countercurrent exchange, similar to what we see in birds in order to maintain homeothermy. The respiratory system, trachea branches into 2 bronchi, which each are divided into secondary and tertiary branches. The smallest air passages of bronchioles lead to those delicate, thin-walled alveoli, which are the site of gas exchange, as in other vertebrates. Most mammals do not respire whatsoever through their skin, but there's some exceptions with loss of carbon dioxide and bat wings and the respiration through the skin of some very young mammals in an immature stage. A muscular diaphragm, as we mentioned, is unique in mammals. So an extension of the body wall musculature separates the lung cavity, the pleural cavity, from the abdominal cavity. During inspiration, the diaphragm is contracted. During expiration, it's relaxed. When resting, humans generally renew only about 10% of the air in their lungs with a single breath. So really different from the strategy we discussed in birds. Other mammals like manatee can renew up to 90% of the air in their lungs with a single breath. And that is what allows them to stay underwater for 20 minutes. So human breathing is involuntary, but in some other mammalian vertebrates like whales, breathing is actually voluntary, which means they must stay awake enough all the time to remember to breathe. And then they have a strategy for resting their brain by maybe only resting part of the brain at once. The digestive system in mammals, the major components of the digestive system are the oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, small intestines, large intestines, rectum, and anus. The oral cavity is bound by the lips, cheeks, the hard palate, and tongue. Teeth are present for the mechanical breakdown of food. There is no gizzard in mammals. Saliva starts to also chemically break down the food while it's still in the mouth. Teeth are confined to the jaws and are much less numerous than in other groups of vertebrates. And only in mammals is there a specific number of teeth to any given species. A lot of mammals have a first set of teeth known as milk teeth. Milk teeth are replaced by permanent adult teeth, and thereafter a damaged tooth won't be replaced in mammals. There are other specialized teeth, including tusk of elephants, teeth such as incisors, canines, molars, are all specializations based on habitat and the ecological role of mammals. All mammals possess 3 main salivary glands. Each gland has a duct that opens into the oral cavity. And there are also 3 types of cells present in the stomach. Mucus cells, chief cells are there to secrete gastric enzymes, which are converted to pepsin, and parental cells secrete hydrochloric acid, acids needed for the pepsin to be effective in breaking down food. The absorptive surface is, and the chief site of digestion is finger-like projections in the small intestines. Villi and microvilli are present. So the small intestines is generally longer in herbivorous mammals compared to the carnivorous mammals. And as with birds and other reptiles, the small intestines can consist of 3 portions. And the large intestines consist of the colon, the cecum, and the rectum. But in mammals, including humans, the distal end of the cecum is thought to be vestigial, and it terminates into the appendix, which, as we know, sometimes ruptures and has to be removed. Nervous system in mammals, the proportion of the brain to the body size is usually greater in mammals than any other vertebrate. There are 4 major regions of the adult brain: the brainstem, the diencephalon, the cerebrum, and the cerebellum, and then spaces in the brain that are filled with cerebral fluid. And I'm actually going to let you guys spend a little more time reading up on the function of the different parts of the brain for time efficiency of this lecture. Some of the sense organs in mammals. Sense of hearing is highly developed in mammals. The the earlobes that pinna serves to funnel sounds to the external ear canal, where they are conveyed to the eardrum. And as we've already mentioned, mammals have a middle ear with 3 bones. The malleus, incus, and the stapes are all in the inner ear. Some mammals, like birds, can use echolocation, or what we would call animal sonar, to locate in dark places. So we know that that exists in bats, but it's also been observed in seals and shrews. Eyes of mammals are similar to those of other amniotes. Rods are present for black and white vision, and they're sensitive during low levels of light, whereas cones are sensitive to colors and bright light. Mammals also have oil droplets, colored, that allow them to filter colors. And as with birds. And so we know that dogs only have 2 color vision and largely see like a colorblind human. Humans and other primates usually have 3 types of cones with different photopigments. Another interesting aspect of the eye, animals with split pupils like cats and the marine toad, elk, red fox, can focus light of different wavelengths through sort of different concentric zones, producing a sharper image with a single focal point at the center. So are generally considered to have better eyesight than humans. And then, of course, we have some mammals with vestigial eyes, like moles, that are effectively blind. Olfactory mechanisms, the nose, are highly developed in many mammals. Olfactory epithelial cells are found in the nasal cavity, and they serve as chemoreceptors, allowing mammals to smell prey, and also they can detect pheromones of the opposite sex. Taste buds tend to be abundant in mammals, found mainly on the tongue, the posterior palate, and the pharynx. And we do see electroreceptors in the duck-billed platypus. So a species that swims a lot in sort of dark, murky waters, the duck-billed platypus can detect the electromagnetic field, electrodensity of other organisms to sense their presence with specialized receptors in their bill. Your genital system in mammals. Most adult kidneys are smooth and more or less bean-shaped. The renal artery, renal vein, nerves, and ureter enter and leave what we call the median notch, or the hilum of the kidney. Nephrons are the functional unit of the kidney, and waste products like urea and uric acid, as well as water and glucose, are all filtered from the blood, and the filtration flows through something called the loop of Henle before entering collecting tubes, which drain into the renal pelvis of the kidney. And in some cases, some of those substances, such as glucose and water, can be reabsorbed if they're needed. Reproduction in mammals. Most all mammals, as we've said, give birth to live young. Young are retained within females' uterus, and gestation can range from 12 days to 24 months in elephants. Lots of mammals have a specific breeding season, but some are not seasonal. And examples of those are elephants and rhinoceros, giraffes, and humans have no specific breeding season. A lot of times with smaller mammals, breeding begins as the photoperiod increases. Quantity and quality of food can affect breeding, number of young in a litter. Most mammals breed only once a year, but some are able to breed multiple times. Um, the gestation period for some mammals is actually dependent upon what's something called delayed implantation, so that fertilization actually occurs, but the embryo does not implant into the uterus until until sometimes months, 4 months. And so for some species, gestation can take almost a year, but that's because of delayed implantation. We see that with bears. So mammals use most of their senses when seeking a mate. They use a variety of sounds, pheromones, smells, antlers, coloration, courtship, bodily contact, all just to find themselves with a good mate in which to procreate. We know that mammals can be monogamous, polygamous, promiscuous. More than 90% of mammal species are polygynous, and with monogamy restricted really just to a handful of species in which parental care is necessary. And a little bit on growth and development. Normally, with the oviparous species, we see 2 spherical eggs about the size of a house sparrow laid 2 weeks after breeding. This is with the duck-billed platypus. Eggs are incubated for about 10 days by the female, and then the young developed temporary breeding pouches in echidnas. After the young hatch, they can remain in the echidna's patch for up to 8 weeks. So all other mammal species are viviparous. They produce young that are attached to a placenta by means of an umbilical cord. Gas exchange, nutrient supply, and waste removal all will occur through that placenta. The shortest gestation period is about 12 days, and the longest is about 22 to 24 months. And the age of sexual maturity really is variable. We see some metavoles that reach maturity within 20 days, and then species like the elephant and humans where it might take 15 years. Parental care is really universal among mammals. As with birds, we can break our species down into altricial species that require longer parental care and precocial species. We see interesting strategies like communal nursing in some species of bats and in prairie dogs. Growth of young in oviparous species, the female platypus produces 2 really undeveloped, naked, blind young annually. They live in a nest chamber, and this species is the only one that doesn't actually have nipples for nursing. Instead, the milk is released from ducts onto a flattened milk patch on the surface of the skin, and the young can actually suck the skin of the platypus to get to that milk. In echidnas, they produce usually a single egg, which is transferred from the cloaca into a temporary pouch. And when young are born, they're nourished by a thick yellowish milk produced with a mammary gland. They remain in their pouch about 6 to 8 weeks. In viviparous species, some animals are born with hair and are precocial, are actually able to run with the herd within hours of birth. Other newborn mammals are born naked, blind, with eyes and ears still sealed at birth, with little or no hair, unable to thermoregulate without their parents. So some of the extremes of altricial species are rabbits, mice, squirrels, dogs, and cats. The lifespan of mammals can be as long as 60 to 70 years in elephants. On average, bats live about 3 times longer than other mammals with similar size and metabolic rate. Some bats live up to 40 years, but a lot of our small mammals' span might range from just 2 to 10 years. And that's it for mammals. I hope that didn't seem too rushed, but I was trying to get that in one go. A few questions for you guys, and this will be your last lecture until we reconvene after the summer break. So I'll stop the recording there.